Another important argument to shed light on is regarding the authenticity of the Quran. Many Muslim preachers try to convert non-Muslims with claims that it is the most authentic religious scripture that exists and is divine in every single way. Hopefully by now, the quotes we have shared in the Quran have made you understand why many people think this isn't the case. Let's dig deeper and understand how the Quran came into existence and its history. As well as trying to prove the authenticity of the Quran, preachers desperately and shamelessly tried to cast doubt on Sidi Buddha and Sadji. We will address these points towards the end. Firstly, it is an undisputed fact that the Prophet Muhammad couldn't read or write. Muhammad himself said that the angel Gabriel revealed the verses of the Quran to him outside the caves of Mount Hira, which is by Mecca. The first question we must ask is, how do we know these are the words of God? An angel is a demigod and they themselves aren't perfect. Furthermore, how do we know everything was written down accurately? Is firstly, Muhammad couldn't read or write himself, and secondly, from passing the words from the angel to Muhammad, in which there could have been a discrepancy. Muslims often use this point to prove the legitimacy of the Quran, boasting that Muhammad was illiterate. Therefore, they must be the words of God. How else could he have produced them? Surely, anyone looking at this in a logical sense would be asking a different question. That being, how can we trust it if Muhammad was illiterate, not the opposite way around? How do we know this revelation was any different from the revelations in the other Abrahamic religions? It sounds like a very similar situation. From their own sources, the words didn't directly come from God, which leaves a lot of room for doubt and error. All religions believe the only possible being in this world is God. That's why there's no doubt whatsoever in Sidi Granth Sahib or the words of the Gurus. The difference with the Gurus is that they weren't prophets, angels or messengers. They were God themselves. Within Gurbani we hear God Parmeshwar Ek Jaan. The Guru and God are one. From their lives, there's nothing that makes us doubt their actions. They were perfect in every way. They gave us the directions to become the best human beings we can, both physically and spiritually. The words of Gurbani weren't tossed through anyone. They were directly from God, from my Guru. The Gurus were a form of God, and again within Gurbani we hear Bolan andar sabko apod Guru kardan. Everyone is bound to making mistakes. Only God and the Gurus are perfect. Now let's look at how the Quran was created into its current form. The Prophet Muhammad asked people to write it down. He couldn't read or write himself. Different parts of the Quran were held by companions of the Prophet. There is no evidence to suggest that he watched over any part of this. And if he did, how could he check, as he was illiterate anyways? All of the writings were sanctioned by his companions, as they were the ones who memorized the verses of the Quran and passed it down. Then we come to a very important point in Islamic history, the Battle of Yamama, which took place in December 1632, a few months after Muhammad died. Many of the scholars who had the Quran memorized were killed in this battle. We hear of this instance in the Hadith, where Zayd bin Thabit, who is the main personal scribe of Muhammad, mentioned a conversation between him and Abu Akbar, who is the father of Aisha, therefore making him the father-in-law of Muhammad, and also the first Caliph or leader of the Islamic community after Muhammad's death. He mentioned that there have been many heavy casualties amongst the Qur'an are the people who have the Quran off by heart, and there is a potential that a large part of the Quran might be lost unless he collects it. Zayd bin Thabit replies by saying, how can he possibly do something the Prophet didn't do himself? They argued for a while, and after he finally agreed. If we read this hadith, we find four major problems with this collection of verses of the Quran that Zayd bin Thabit himself identifies. Firstly, Muhammad didn't even compile or correct the Quran himself. How do we know it was ever to be corrected if Muhammad didn't instruct it to be in his lifetime? He describes this task as so difficult that it's harder than moving mountains. Again, Muhammad didn't do it himself, so even if the Prophet didn't do it, how could his companion do it accurately? Zayd found two verses he didn't find anywhere else. This is evidence that there were differences in the verses worth being collected. Lastly, of all the verses that were tossed down from different people, who each had different versions from different manuscripts, we hear how these were collected. And they were from parchments, which is traitor made from animal skin, scapula, niche stalks of date palms, and other random places. Whatever was collected then ended up with Hafsa, one of Muhammad's wives. All of the above points bring about various questions regarding the authenticity of the Quran and the questionable way in which it was brought together as we know it today. As mentioned above, Caliph Abu Bakr died the process of collecting the Quran and ordered people who knew the Quran to scribe it down. This was all organized and supervised by the Prophet Muhammad's key scribe, Zayd bin Thabit. They cross-referenced it amongst themselves. There is nothing mentioned about how the initial works were used. This is all from memory. Caliph Uthman bin Hassan overlooked the standard traduction and alignment of the Quran. Moving forward, we find that the Quran in its initial form wasn't in one single volume. It was teased together by different people with differing opinions. From the hadith, we hear of this where the Caliph Uthman says to the people in charge describing this one standard form of the Quran to write it in a different language, the language of Quraysh, which is the original language in which the Quran was scribed. If they differ on any points with Zayd bin Thabit, who was the principal writer at the time of Muhammad, a problem arises as this suggests that 3 of the scribes would have disagreed with the original scribe, Zayd bin Thabit, who is the main person in charge and was personally the Prophet. A problem arises as this suggests that 3 of the scribes would have disagreed with Zayd bin Thabit, who was the main person in charge and was the Prophet's main personal scribe. Lastly, we see a worry regarding the differences in recitations between the Muslims of the times that caused Uthman to request the copy of the Quran that Hafsa was keeping, which again was the copy created by Zayd bin Thabit from whatever he could collect together. He collected this in order to standardize one copy so that he could save the Muslims and so that they don't differ about the Quran just like the Jews and Christians did before. Once completed, we see written in the hadith that Caliph Uthman ordered all other Quranic materials, whether written in fragmentary manuscripts or whole copies, to be burned. The 2 main takeaways from this hadith is that there already existed different versions before this one was compiled. Secondly, due to everything else being burned, there's no way of cross-referencing things now. Here we find a lot of questionable points along the timeline for this final version being compiled. It seemed as if they were more worried about the differences in the Quran rather than the authenticity, and as a result compiled one copy with the rest to be burnt in an attempt to save Muslims from any disagreement. From the above points taken from Islamic history, we see many causes for the concern in relation to the authenticity of the Quran. Firstly, from the fact the so-called revelation was given to Muhammad via an angel and not from God directly. Secondly, the fact that he was illiterate, which causes us to question how it could have been possibly taught by Muhammad. We then look at key historical battles, such as the Battle of Yamama, where many of those who had the Quran by heart from the times of Muhammad were killed. Then, in an attempt to save the verses of the Quran, whatever was left was compiled together. Once the one version was agreed, all other scriptures were burned, which from a historical lens is very problematic, as it doesn't allow for any cross-examination and therefore any real way to authenticate what was produced. Now, if we focus our attention to Sidi Granth Sahib in the Sikh faith, we are very fortunate to not be in a similar situation. Rather, Gurbani, the scripture, was written first-hand by the Gurus and in the presence of the Gurus. Furthermore, when the challengers put to Guru Gobind Singh Ji when they were compiling the final and correct version of Sidi Granth Sahib at Damdama side, they recited the whole scripture from memory over 9 months. This lined up with the versions that were created by the previous Gurus, including the numbering systems and their general contents. Furthermore, we have many other versions of Sidi Granth Sahib and other Pothis and Gurkha Sahids that were written by Guru Sikhs of the time that match up with the version of Guru Granth Sahib scribed by the Gurus themselves and the same Guru Granth Sahib we have in each Gurdwara now. Some of the examples include Guru Sikhs like Baba Deep Singh Ji and Bhai Mani Singh Ji. Additionally, we have versions of Guru Granth Sahib that contain the signatures of each of the Gurus, from the 6th Guru, Guru Har Gobind Sahib, all the way through to the 10th Guru, Guru Gobind Singh Ji. They each have the exact same writings, Gurbani, and can still be found in historical Gurdwaras across Punjab and India. Throughout history, we see this continuity with examples of Sarups of Guru Granth Sahib still being preserved and presented in the same way in the times of Maharaja Ranjit Singh Ji and so on. For Sangati, let's not fall prey to the desperate attempts used by many Muslims and the so-called authenticity of the Quran argument they use when trying to convert non-Muslims. Many Muslims are questioned won't even know about the history we have discussed today. It makes us appreciate how lucky we are to be Sikhs and children of Guru Nanak Dev Ji, who have given us this tough, can make the most of our lives, connect to God, should connect to Waheguru, and overcome all of the obstacles life has to throw us. Please like, share and subscribe, and let's arm ourselves with the knowledge of Sikhi, but also the truths regarding other religions, so that we aren't led astray and we appreciate the power the Guru has gifted us if we make an effort and start walking along this path of Sikhi. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.